Today's the day that we are going to bake a sourdough loaf together. I am so beyond excited. This has absolutely been something that I've really enjoyed the past 4 or 5-ish months. And I was a little hesitant to make this video because I still feel like quite a baking novice, especially when it comes to sourdough, and I'm still making mistakes. I'm still learning and growing in my experience and wisdom, and a lot of the science behind it still doesn't fully make sense to me. But I didn't want those insecurities to hold us back. I wanted to show you all of the wisdom I've collected so far, and the loaves that we have been making are so delicious. So I want to be able to share this with you. And my sweet friend Alyssa, who I love so much, she actually really helped me with my sourdough journey and taught me a lot of what I know. So I really want to be that friend to you and share little tidbits along the way and what has really helped me kind of get in the routine, because it is a process, okay? Making sourdough bread definitely is a process. You have to plan ahead, but once you get in a schedule and get in a groove, it becomes a lot easier and so worth it, because the finished product is absolutely divine. So I'm really excited, and I want to start out by sharing, of course, a key component of beautiful sourdough, and that is the sourdough starter. So essentially, the sourdough starter is active and alive yeast and good bacteria. Mine's actually hanging out on the floating shelf back here. This is where I typically keep it. So this is how ours is looking. It is very active, very bubbly, and it is not even close to being ready to be fed. I feed it at 9 p.m. and it's currently around 3:45. So it's a very happy starter, and for me, I feel like that has been the biggest game changer, is having a starter that is incredibly active and sour, so you get that beautiful sourdough flavor. So I just want to share a little background about this starter. So my friend Alyssa, who taught me all that I know pretty much, she gave me her discard of her starter, and that really helped me because I first tried to bake sourdough in March 2020, as many of us did when it became a trending hobby and activity, and it really was so mediocre. And I actually made my own sourdough starter, and you can make this just with flour and water, and you just have to be patient and let it ferment. So I think it was okay, but the thing is, the older, it's like aged cheese. I believe that the older and more mature and complex the sourdough starter is, the more flavor you'll have in your bread. That's just what I've experienced. So if you are looking for a sourdough starter, one, you can either make it on your own, which is a very rewarding thing to it's like growing a plant from seed. So that is very rewarding if you choose to do it that way. Or you can reach out to your local community, see if there's anybody that you know that already bakes sourdough, and ask them for some of their sourdough discard. Another thing you can do is, if you don't know anyone currently who bakes sourdough, you could also check out Facebook groups. Maybe type out where you live and then sourdough and see if any Facebook groups come out, and then you'll probably find like a community of people who love to bake and would be happy to share their discard. Or you can buy it online. So Etsy sells it. I don't know if Amazon sells it. I wouldn't be surprised, but maybe. And lots of like little small shops. But on Etsy, I was tempted to buy some discard. It was like 400-year-old French sourdough loaf discard. They have some fancy discards that you can purchase, so that's pretty cool. But I'm super thankful for this happy one. And again, that is where you need to start, because that's a key component. And we personally keep our sourdough starter in the refrigerator, and we only feed it when we're ready to bake, getting ready to bake. So last night and this morning I fed it, and it's after 2 feedings, it's active enough to start baking. So how you know it's active enough, you can smell it and see all the bubbles, and if it's growing in size as it's sitting between feedings, that's always a good sign. And another thing you can do is a float test. You have a cup of water or a bowl of water, and then you add some of the discard on top of it, and if it floats, that is a very good sign. It's not a bulletproof test, but it's a very good sign. So those are some backgrounds and knowledge tidbits about the sourdough starter. And I'll go ahead and link a lot of resources and other videos, a tutorial of how to make your own sourdough starter and just more background behind it if you are finding it interesting. So you can check that out. And then this is sort of my schedule. So I've tried a few different recipes, and actually this past weekend I tried a recipe that only took about 12 hours in total, not active work, but just from start to finish with resting time and all of that. But this specific recipe, it does take a couple of days, which may sound so daunting, but again, once you get in the routine, it's really not so bad, and a lot of the time isn't active work. You're just waiting for it to rise and be ready and activate. So I'll take you through it, but today is Thursday, and we will have our beautiful sourdough loaves by Saturday morning. So that's sort of the plan, and tomorrow is when we do the most work, where we're going to need to make our dough, let it sit and shape our loaves, and then after that we just put it in the fridge for about 12 hours and then bake. So that's the rundown, and I'm going to go ahead and link the faster recipes, because if you'd like a more quick and simple recipe, you'll have that as a starting point. But again, this has just been the best formula for me and our sourdough that just makes it that much more delicious and fluffy, and you have that beautiful flavor. And tonight we're gonna make our levain, which I feel like is a really key component to that delicious sourdough flavor, and it really enhances that flavor. So that's the rundown. Again, I want to set you up for success and not make it seem too daunting, because it really is so rewarding. And I'm also going to show you how I add in flavors to the sourdough. So I'm going to do a rosemary garlic loaf. I'm going to do one plain and then one rosemary garlic. And that's another thing I love about this recipe, is that it produces 2 loaves, which actually I think I'm going to make 3 loaves and just make smaller loaves this go around. So it's great. So if you want to keep one for yourself, you can totally do that, or gift it to a loved one. And then if you want to do different flavors, you have that flexibility. So I really love this recipe, and I hope you do as well. So I'm going to let this starter have a bit more time, and then I'll see you later tonight when we make our levain. Hello, good evening. I'm back again in my PJs now because I'm getting ready for bed, but first we need to make our levain so we can prep our dough in the morning. So for this, you'll need your sourdough starter, all bubbly and active, and then you'll need another jar where you can make your levain. And again, the levain really helps create a more intense sourdough flavor, because we're gonna take 27 grams of the sourdough starter and then add in 135 grams of bread flour and water. So we'll let this sit overnight, and then we'll use that to bake our dough, and we'll have a good amount to work with. So that's sort of the gist about it. So I'm going to make the levain, and again, I'll put the measurements in the description in case you do want to follow this recipe. And then I'm also going to feed my sourdough starter and then put it into the fridge and let it hang out into the fridge until next time I bake bread. And if there ever is a time where I don't bake bread once a week, I'll just make sure I feed my starter once a week, but then it can continue to hang out in the fridge. And basically the cooler temperatures, it just slows down the whole process. So it just helps it kind of stay fresh. That's as far as I know about it, at least. So that's the plan. And my ratios for feeding my sourdough starter, I do 20 grams of the starter, and then 40 grams of bread flour and 40 grams of water. And I do filtered water from the refrigerator. Some people get this fancy bottled water, but the refrigerator water has worked fine for us. So that's the plan. Let's get to it. levain that we prepped. I'm just gonna leave it on the counter right here overnight. It's good in general when you keep your levain or starter out to keep it away from any vent. And a big factor is temperature. So if it is really warm or really cold in your house, it can affect the starter and just the active yeast. So that's something to consider. But I feel like now that we're approaching the warmer months, it's a really great time to start baking, so you can kind of get your footing and get a feel for it, because at least in my experience, I do find it easier to have successful starter and everything when it is warmer, because it prefers a more mild and warm-ish climate. So something that I'm going to do, that I like to do every so often, is mark where our levain is at night, and then in the morning we can see how much it grew. This is fun to do with your starter as well. So I do have quite a bit coming up on the sides, but just for a general idea, we see like the bulk of it is starting right around here. So we have a little dry erase marker, and we'll see how much it grows, but I'll see you in the morning. Good morning. The time has come. Our levain is ready. It's time to make our dough. So yesterday I was saying levain, but the French proper way to say it is levain, and it is absolutely popping off. I'm so excited about it. Okay, so we made our little indicator last night, and look at how much it's grown. It is bubbly, smells amazing, and it's just happy as can be. So that's such a good time, such a good sign. So I'm gonna take my, okay, so you can take a big bowl or like a big mixing bowl. I think the KitchenAid stainless steel bowl would work really well. Or you could take a bucket like this, which I will say this is handy because it rises quite vertically and you can really see how your dough is changing throughout the day. So this is great, but you can use what you have, absolutely. And I'm going to take 560 grams of water, which ideally you want warm water around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm gonna pour the water in my bucket, add all my levain, and then add in 900 grams of flour. And we are gonna mix and mix and mix until there are no dry bits. You really can't overmix your dough, so I like to just mix with my hand, and I'll show you the whole process. But that's what we're gonna do. And this morning, the process is gonna take about 2 hours, but not active working. So we're gonna do some stretch and folds and then let it rest so you can do other things around the house, but you will need to be home for this portion for 2 hours, a little over 2 hours, if I'm being real. Especially the first time you start doing this, just block off 3 hours so you can give yourself plenty of time to take your time and do all the things you need to do to get it right. So let's go for it, but good morning, I'm excited. We're one step closer. Since I get our filtered water from the refrigerator, it comes out quite cold, so I'll just put it over the burner for a couple minutes on low so that it can warm up. And then I'll add it into my bucket. I have my scale on so I know how many grams I'm pouring in. And again, we want 560. I feel like I said 570, but we want 560 grams of filtered water. $35 grams short, so let's add some more. And I'm gonna need some more water for a sea salt water mixture, so I'll just start heating some more up. Okay, I have my warm water, and I went ahead and took off all my rings because we'll be mixing with our hands. I just find that to be the easiest, but you could also use a spatula, but you really wanna, I think it's helpful to be able to feel the dough because you really wanna make sure that there's no dry bits of flour. Okay, now I'm pulling out my scale again, and we are going to measure out 900 grams of bread flour. And I have baked with all-purpose flour before, so if you only have all-purpose flour or prefer that, I will link the recipe I followed for that because there are quite a few adjustments. So you can definitely do that. But bread flour, the difference is that it has a higher protein count. So it really is just the preferred flour and consistency for the sourdough loaves. So that's my knowledge of it. But there are recipes for many different types of flours. So again, you can play around and see what works best. But the bread flour has worked out really well for us, and that's what I use to feed our starter as well. I actually had to run to the grocery store this morning because I realized I did not have enough bread flour, which has happened multiple times. So try to be more prepared than I am and stock up if you plan to bake quite often. There we are, 900 grams. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so now I'm gonna take it off the scale, roll up my sleeves, and mix it all together. This could take 5-10 minutes, really just depends, but again, you wanna make sure it's all mixed up and incorporated. Here's what our dough is looking like, all mixed up. It is rather tough and sticky, but it will change as we go along. So now we're gonna let it rest, and you can let it rest for 30 minutes or up to an hour. And since I have more flexibility today, I am going to let it rest for an hour. So I'm just gonna cover it with a damp cloth. That's what I typically do, but you could use plastic wrap, that'll work fine. So we have that, we'll set our timer. I'll do it on my phone if I'm moving around a lot, but I anticipate staying in this general area. So we'll put 60 minutes on the clock. So while our dough is doing its thing, let's go ahead and mix our salt mixture that we'll add in during our first turn. So you're gonna take 20 grams of water, or filtered water, and then I like to do 27 grams of this coarse kosher salt, but you can use any kind of sea salt. And I'll just measure it all out, mix it up, and then we'll incorporate it into the dough once our timer goes off. That's our cue. It's time to do our first stretch and fold. Okay, so here's how our dough is looking. Still a bit scruffy, a little disheveled, but it'll really start to come together and form. And just a little background around the stretch and folds. The folds strengthen the gluten and gently incorporate air into the dough while creating volume. So we are gonna do 4 folds in total, and I've done different recipes in the past where there's only 1 or 2 folds or 3 folds, but having 4 of the folds, again, is just gonna help us really create that bouncy and voluptuous volume that is just so pleasant for a sourdough loaf. So I'm also going to incorporate our salt and water mixture. So I like to do a little bit at a time as I'm folding. So I have it there, and then, an important step is to wet your hand. So I'm gonna run it under the sink real quick. So that just helps the dough not stick to your hand as much. And then I'm gonna cup my hand. I'm gonna try to reach the bottom of my bucket. And then I'm gonna pull the dough as far as I can, like this, without it breaking. And I'm gonna fold it over itself and then tuck it in to the other side. And I'm gonna continue doing that until we reach a full circle. Alrighty, there we have it. That's kind of the final look of what mine looks like for after the first fold. And then I'm just gonna cover it again with my damp cloth and let it sit for 30 minutes, and then we're gonna repeat that step minus the sea salt. Okay, we finished our 4th turn, and now it's time for bulk fermentation. So we're just gonna let it sit on the countertop for 5 to 8 hours. I know that's a really long range, but I'll probably let it sit for 8-ish hours because I have plans later this evening, so I'll be gone when the 6-hour mark hits. It's about noon now. So you don't need to stress out about it. Don't need to be super specific about the time, but essentially your dough is ready to shape when it doubles about 30 to 50%. So I'm gonna use my dry erase marker again, and we're gonna just mark about where the dough is right now. And then we'll get to see how much it rises. So that's always fun, and we're getting closer and closer with each step. And during this, I'm also gonna prep, while this is just sitting out, I'm also gonna prep my garlic and rosemary for adding that flavor to one of our loaves. So we're planning ahead, but again, we're getting closer. Okay, update, a little change of plans. It's only been about 3 hours, but look at how much it's already risen. It's like about to pop out of this bucket soon here. I mean, it is a happy camper. And I mentioned that I have plans tonight, and I'm leaving home around like 5:45, 6-ish. So I think we should go ahead and shape our dough before we leave instead of later. And I just wanted to like talk this out because when I first started baking sourdough, I was so regimented about the schedule, and like I let it control my day, but now I control the sourdough's day instead. I don't let it like alter my plans or anything. So I just want to like say that as a caveat because it is important. There is a lot of emphasis put on timing and schedule when it comes to baking, but I like to believe and I like to just go more with the flow and let it happen how it's gonna happen. And again, now that it's warming up, the process is sped up so much. Like it is about 75 degrees in our home right now, so that is really speeding up the process. I'm also currently baking a quiche, so the oven's on, so that's like adding a warmer atmosphere. So again, lots of factors, but we're not gonna let the dough control our day. We're just gonna go with the flow. So with all that being said, I'm gonna give it like another hour or two, but I wanna prepare our roasted garlic and rosemary for that loaf so that we have that all ready to go because we'll be adding that in as we shape and do our final dough structure. So that's the plan. Let's go out to the garden, get some rosemary, and roast our garlic in the air fryer. Look at this beauty. It is so voluptuous. It's definitely double in size. Voluptuous is absolutely one of my favorite words to describe bread. I just think it fits, right? I mean, look at those bubbles. It is definitely ready. So I'm gonna transport it over to this wooden cutting board I have, and I'm gonna sprinkle this lightly, emphasis on lightly, with flour. I like to use this little sifter because it helps me sprinkle more evenly. So I'm gonna do that, and then we are going to cut it into 3 loaves because like I mentioned, I wanna do 3 loaves instead of 2 loaves, but you can absolutely do whatever you fancy. And I'm gonna start to shape it, which I'll show you, and in one of the loaves, I'll add my roasted garlic and rosemary. It's so jiggly. And I'm gonna do 1 smaller loaf, like kind of a mini loaf. And then we'll do 2 sort of medium-sized loaves. Okay, and I'm gonna flip them over, but first we're gonna sprinkle them with some flour to make it a little less sticky. I feel like my loaves tend to be quite moist and a little more on the sticky side. I don't know if it's because of the Florida humidity or my ratios and measurements. I'm not quite sure, but I am not too frugal with the flour because we have a great bit of moisture already. Let me go ahead and shape the miniature one first because I feel like that'll be easiest to show you. So we're gonna try to form it into a bit of a ball. And I feel like this is, I will say, shaping it is probably what I'm the worst at. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, but I'll show you how I do it. Okay, I'm actually gonna flip it over again because I like this side better for the bottom. And you're kind of stretching and folding again, but essentially you're just folding it into itself to create a bit of a ball. I need to flour my hands a little bit sticky. I like to keep my flour just open and close so that I can reach for it whenever I need it. Okay, and this is just the first little shaping, and we're gonna do a final shape in 15 minutes. So we're just gonna leave it like that. Just get the beginning stages going. We'll leave it as it is. And then this one, we'll do the rosemary garlic. Okay, so I have it here, ready to go. And I'm going to, oh yeah, it's sticky, sticky, sticky. I'm going to stretch one side and then transport some of the rosemary garlic. And it doesn't need to be precise. It'll kind of work itself out as we continue to shape it. And then I fold it over itself. And then I'm gonna stretch out this side a bit, take a handful, and I'll kind of like press it down a bit so that it sticks to the dough more. And then fold it in on itself. And then we're gonna do that again on this side. And you just do that until you run out of your filling, your flavor filling. So sometimes I make too much, sometimes I could make more, but again, you don't have to be too precise. You'll refine the art of making your loaves as you go. At least that's how I like to think about it. I don't like to be too much of a perfectionist because I feel like it'll just evolve as time goes. Okay, I moved us over to the island because we'll need a bit more space because we're gonna be doing this directly on the countertop because you need some tension. So I'm gonna super lightly dust the countertop with flour, and then you also need to prepare your bowls. So this is where your loaves are gonna live for the next 12 to 24 hours. You can let them proof in the fridge for quite some time, 1 or 2 days is what I'm aware of. So we're gonna bake in the morning, so we'll let ours proof for about 18 hours. And you need to dust the bowls. If you add a towel like this, you need to dust it with flour so that it doesn't stick to the towel. And same with your banneton. If you decide to go with a banneton, but a bowl works perfectly fine. I do this every single week. I do have bannetons, so I also use them, but sometimes my bowls work even better just with the shape of them. So it really depends, but again, use what you have, especially when starting out. You don't need to buy all these fancy tools and equipment. You really can be resourceful. So let's do it. We're gonna transport our loaves to our lightly floured countertop and then go from there. Okay, let's shape our little miniature dough first. So I'm transporting it over to the countertop with my bench knife, and I'm going to flip it over so that the seam side is up. And I'm going to do the same thing where we just fold it in on itself, and we're creating a seam at the bottom. And once we put it into our bowl or banneton, that seam side is going to be up because then we'll flip it over into the Dutch oven tomorrow morning. Okay, and then I flipped it over once I created that seam again. And now I'm going to cup the loaf and try to add some tension. So I have a little bit too much flour here, but you need some tension with your countertop, and you're gonna drag it like 1 inch at a time to create that more round shape, and you're gonna twist as you turn it. So I'm gonna move the camera soon to give you a better angle, but hopefully you can kind of visually see how I'm working it. Garlic loaf. Okay, and then I'm gonna gently place it into the bowl, seam side up, which my seams never look that great, but typically it turns out beautiful anyways. shape it. Like, you'll watch professionals do this and it's a lot less messier and definitely more refined, but I'm still relatively new to this, but it works out. So you don't always have to be super fancy. Okay, so fire my hands. Transporting it over, cupping the bottom, sliding it over to create that beautiful, beautiful shape. Here they are, little cuties. So now we're gonna cold proof, and I have these plastic bags that I put them in that my friend Liz gave to me, and they're pretty helpful because you can just slide the loaves into the plastic bags. I actually just have 2 of them though, so I'll need to figure something out for, or maybe I can fit 2 in one bag. I don't know, we'll see. But you could also just cover it with plastic wrap, or be resourceful. The hardest part is finding enough room in your fridge to fit your loaves. We did it. See you in the morning. Good morning. I just woke up, but it's a very exciting morning because it is baking day. It is time almost to enjoy our bread and turn our home into a bakery. The smell once it's in the oven is phenomenal. So cheers to that. I hope you all are excited. So I've already sort of started. I turned our oven on. I'm preheating it to 500 degrees, which I know sounds intense. We're actually gonna lower the temperature to 450 degrees once we start baking. But you really want it to be warm and nice and toasty in there. And I also have my Dutch oven in the oven so that it's nice and hot and can be ready to carry the bread. So make sure you have those oven mitts handy. And now I'm gonna take my first dough out of the fridge and transfer it over to parchment paper and score, which is always like the fun, artistic part. And I'll show you a couple of my favorite scoring methods. So let's go ahead and do that. I always have a hard time with these boxes, cutting the paper with these boxes, so I always opt for scissors. And then I like to crunch the parchment paper up so that it's more moldable. We've got a Palmer right at our feet. Gently flip it out of your banneton or your bowl. Beautiful, beautiful. This is my rosemary garlic one. Okay, and now I'm gonna take a little bit of flour. You can use rice flour or bread flour, whatever flour really. And I'm going to dust my loaf. Okay, then I'm gonna take a razor blade or a sharp knife. I have this razor blade that I got off of Amazon. Then I'm gonna do like a half moon shape for this one. So I do a pretty deep cut, and then I'll do some of these cute little leaf designs. That's what I think of them as, just these little dashes, and sort of go in the shape of my original half moon design. One of my favorite accounts to follow on Instagram is called Cottage Loaves, and she is truly a sourdough professional, and she does the most intricate and amazing themed designs. So I'll put her profile for some inspo, but I definitely don't get that fancy, but I still like to have fun with it. Okay, I just pulled my Dutch oven out of the oven. Make sure, again, you have your oven mitts. This thing is hot. So I'm gonna take off the lid and gently transfer my loaf into the Dutch oven. And then I'm gonna top it with the lid again, and then pop it in the oven and set a timer for 20 minutes. And then once the 20 minutes is up, we are going to remove the lid from the Dutch oven and let it bake for about 10-15 more minutes. Oh my goodness, I'm giddy. Look at this absolute beauty. Wow, 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 wow. So this is looking delicious, and the rosemary garlic smells too good. I'm so excited. Okay, so I took the lid off, and now I'm gonna put it back in the oven, and I'm gonna set a timer for 15 minutes and then check on it after that, and maybe we'll add a little bit more time. It really depends on your preference too with how crusty you like it to be. So of course, if you want more of that brown toasted look, you'll leave it in a bit longer. So we'll see how we feel after 15 minutes. Look at this absolute beauty. This is it after 15 minutes, and we are good to go. So now I'm just gonna repeat all those steps for our other 2 loaves. Someone's excited. I did a different scoring design for each, so we have a cute little variety. I love our mini loaf, it's so adorable. And you may be thinking, yay, it's finally time to cut into them and eat, but not so fast. It's actually recommended to wait a few hours after you bake, because technically the bread is still cooking as it cools, and the steam trapped inside the bread will actually start to move outwards to the crust. So if you cut it too early, this will stop that process. So you have to have some self-control, which is really hard when it smells so delicious, but we'll get there soon. So I'm just gonna let this cool for a couple hours. We'll see, maybe a few hours if I can wait that long, and then we'll finally cut into it and enjoy. Has come. We're gonna cut these loaves and do a taste test. Let's cut the rosemary garlic one first. The bottom is always pretty tricky to cut because it's more crusty. So I'll just put it on its side, or sometimes even cut it top down so that it's easier to handle. Oh my goodness, look at that beauty. Nice and airy, light. Smells so good. Taste test. This is the plain loaf, piece of the plain loaf. Still a little warm. Even after a few hours, it still has a bit of warmth to it. So good. Thank you all so much for watching this bake with me. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. I know it can seem like a lot and a little bit daunting. That's how I felt when I first started baking, but I really hope this was helpful. And of course, I'll link all of the supplies, resources, materials, etc., to hopefully give you the confidence to start your baking journey. But thank you so much again for watching, and I cannot wait to see you next. Happy baking. Bye.
Bye.
Say bye, Palmer. Bye, my baking buddy.